Hello, welcome back to another quilting video. Recently I shared my symphony quilt top, and when I did I mentioned that I'd done a little chain piecing experiment, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we even get to the experiment, what is chain piecing? If you've never heard of it, it's possible that you're already doing it without even knowing. When I first learned of the term chain piecing, it was kind of like, hey, I do that all the time. Chain piecing is when you work on all of your quilt blocks together at the same time. Rather than taking one block and completing it start to finish, you do step 1 of all of your blocks and then step 2 of all of your blocks, step 3, so you finish all of them together at the same time. Everyone says that chain piecing is faster, it's easier, it's just all around better. I've always kind of not really been fussed one way or another which method I use to piece my blocks, but for this quilt I decided I would get super scientific and figure out which way is faster once and for all. My setup for this experiment was to have my sewing machine up on top of these drawers, and then I moved this little table next to me and set up my mini ironing board on top. So this way I could swivel between the two and I wasn't wasting time getting up between the sewing and the pressing. I began by making a couple of test blocks just to make sure that I had the method down pat and I was following the pattern correctly, and then I divided all of my cut fabric into 2 piles. I needed to make 44 blocks, so we had 22 to be chain pieced and 22 to be pieced in the standard regular way. I made a really simple spreadsheet in Google Docs, and every time I worked on the blocks for this experiment, I entered in my starting time, my ending time, what I was working on, and then later on I went back and added up the total minutes I spent. Because I was recording this, I made sure to stop the time whenever I moved the camera or set up the tripod or whatever it was. So let's get into the experiment. I began with the chain piecing half. I set my fabrics up next to me beside the sewing machine, and then just one after another like a factory assembly line, I just sewed the first seam of all 22 blocks. I took them off the machine, trimmed them apart, pressed them, and then we began again doing seam 2. I sat and did all of the chain piecing in an afternoon. By some weird coincidence, it took me exactly 222 minutes to piece 22 blocks using the chain piecing method. Dividing that to get a per block time, we get 10.09 minutes per block. At this point I wasn't quite sure, was this fast, was this slow? It seems like a pretty reasonable amount of time for a block this size with this many seams, and I guess we'll see how it compares to normal piecing. With the second half of my quilt blocks, I timed each one individually. So I'll pull up the pretty table that I made for my blog post on this. You can see they're all roughly consistent. The quickest blocks took me 9 minutes, and the slowest blocks took me 13 minutes. This is going from start to finish, one block at a time. To make it a fair comparison, I added up the total time taken for this second half of the block, and that gave me 242 minutes. Dividing this again by 22 blocks, we have exactly 11 minutes per block. I think this is the best average to go with because it's the same as I figured out the time for the chained piece blocks. So for consistency's sake, I'm happy to go with this. Overall, chain piecing saved 20 minutes with this quilt. It's only a baby quilt, so fair enough, it's not a huge difference for 22 blocks, just under a minute per block. But to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed by that. I did really think that chain piecing would be astronomically faster, but I guess that's why we experiment, to actually find out. That said, there are a couple of really big benefits to chain piecing that aren't just the time saved. First of all, just the reduced waste that chain piecing creates as opposed to the normal piecing method is just crazy. I figured out that each regularly pieced block was producing between 96 and 120 centimeters of wasted thread, which is just insane. That's ridiculous. With chain piecing, we do still have that little tail of wasted thread at the beginning, but we've only got a centimeter in between each block. So over 22 blocks and 12 seams in this particular block, I came up with only 32 to 34 centimeters of wasted thread per block. Obviously, any level of waste is not a good thing. Quilting is inherently wasteful in some ways when we're always trimming blocks and trimming thread. I try to be really good about using up my scraps, combining my batting like in my beach quilt recently. So this is something that I'm really trying to be mindful of, and this alone is enough of a reason to prioritize chain piecing over regular piecing in my mind. So from here on out, chain piecing is the clear best choice when it's appropriate. It doesn't always work out with a particular quilt, but anytime that I can chain piece, that's what I plan to do going forward. And I hope it's something that maybe you think about too. Let me know what you thought of this little experiment. If you've looked into the same thing, come up with the same results, different results, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And if you like this video, please remember to subscribe because I am planning a few more little experiments like this one. So I'll see you in the next one.